Do you ever want to dive deeper into the Bible, but you just don't know where to begin or struggle to feel like you even have the time? When you read the Bible, do you get frustrated because you know there is so much more in there, you just have no clue how to get it out? Or maybe you want to know the Bible better and you're looking for any resource to help. Well, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the Context and Color of the Bible podcast. We are two sisters.
I'm Veronica.
I'm Erica, and we love to study the Bible and help others understand it better. When it comes to our own study of Scripture, we have found that in bringing back the context of Scripture, it adds to our understanding. It actually adds color to the black and white pages of the text. Well, Veronica.
Are you ready for another round?
I know, another dive into Leviticus.
Yes. This time today will be a little bit slower, easier to comprehend. But I'm still setting up the foundation for Leviticus.
That's okay. This is a book I think most of us rarely dive into.
That's true.
And so it's okay to
And
take some
so
time to do a foundation.
We're going to build some shelves.
Some more shelves.
Yep, some more shelves.
Okay.
So what I want you to think about is picture in your mind the tabernacle in the courtyard.
Okay, those three rectangles again?
No, the actual. Like how they really, like open up the back of your Bible.
And see,
because you're going to have, how did I write it? A rectangular perimeter fence of fabric.
Right, around the courtyard.
Around the courtyard. And inside the courtyard, then, you have the altar and the basin. And then you have the actual tabernacle.
Right.
Again, of fabric.
Right.
So you have a big rectangle.
And then a smaller rectangle. And then an even smaller rectangle. So we're kind of getting like concentric rectangles.
Yes. Because one of the things I'm realizing as I'm studying Leviticus, and I said this last week, is all about separation. And there's all these boundaries and levels of separation.
Right.
And so when you have the courtyard, anyone could walk around outside the courtyard.
Like outside the
initial perimeter fence.
Right.
Jew, Gentile.
We're all welcome out there.
Yeah. You're all living outside that.
Right. True.
Okay. But then to walk into the courtyard can only be Jews.
Right.
And then to walk into the actual tabernacle itself is only those from the tribe of Levi.
Right.
So in a way, you already have a level of separation.
Right.
You have all people. Mm-hmm. Then you get a little bit more confined, more defined Jews. Right. And then you get even smaller and you get tribe of Levi.
And then you get tiny.
And then you get tiny to just the holy priest.
The high priest.
The high priest. Yeah, the high priest.
In the most holy place. That's what you were thinking of.
Yeah. But if you think about that, we actually see these kind of boundaries and grouping of things.
Right.
You see it in the prophets. You see... let me look at my notes where I wrote it.
Like when it's talking about like the Israelites, the Levites.
Yes. You get all the nations.
Oh, right.
The Gentiles.
Right.
And then you get Jews.
Right.
And then you get priests.
Right. Yep.
So you can have that grouping. You also get it with animals.
Oh, right.
You have all animals that God created.
Right.
Then you have the ones God set aside as clean animals.
Right.
That can be eaten. And then you get even smaller and you have animals that can be sacrificed.
Not every clean animal that could be eaten could be sacrificed.
Correct.
So you're consistently getting smaller.
Yes. And as you consistently get smaller, each one gets a little bit closer to God.
Right.
That sacrificed animal got closer than
the animal you just ate.
Yeah. Which is even closer to God than the one that's not allowed to be eaten.
Running around in my backyard.
Just like the Jews compared to the nations.
Right.
Were able to go into the temple. I'm going to stick with
in the courtyard.
Into the courtyard.
Right.
Just like within the Jews, only the tribe of Levi could get into the actual tabernacle.
Right.
And so you have these boundaries, these separations, but I want to add one more. At Mount Sinai, you had all the people at the base of the mountain.
Right.
And then you had God calling to Moses and Aaron and Aaron's two sons and the 70 elders to go up on the mountain.
Right.
Exodus 24. And they ate in God's presence.
Right.
And then God called again and called Moses out of the cloud in the fire and said, Moses, come up here to the top. So only Moses then went up.
Right.
So in a way, who was this? Jacob Milgram, I think is who I got this from. Let me look at my colors. Yes. My notes are color coded.
But each author was a different color.
Yes. No, it was Mary Douglas. It was Mary Douglas. You could almost take the tabernacle, that courtyard, and put it on end in the rectangular going vertically along and compare it to the mountain. Let's put it that way.
Okay, right.
You have all at the base,
right,
people, and then you get a little bit smaller.
Right.
And then at the top of the mountain and the top of the Holy of Holies, only the high priest. Does that make sense?
It does. And I don't know. I'm going to apologize if I jump like way to the end of your notes, but that just amazes me to think that at the end of Revelation, how God is going to rip.
She thinks my notes go to Revelation. I'm in trouble.
That's so funny.
Oh,
No. Okay, good. That like at the end of time, God is going to bring the new Jerusalem down and like he's going to rip open holiness and it's going to fill the universe and that separation is going to be gone and we're all going to live in God's presence in the holy place, in the most holy place of Jerusalem. It just to have that separation. So it's there right now. It is a part of the world we live in. God created it, but with the intention that eventually it will be gone.
Right.
And we will all be there.
We won't need those levels and those separations.
Right. Because we'll all be at the top. Well, or right under God, I guess, if he's still at the top. Like, we'll all be right under.
Right.
But
we'll be walking into his presence.
Yes. That's an amazing thought.
But with that kind of leads, because we have levels of holiness then.
Right.
In Leviticus. In holiness, if you have levels of holiness, that implies separation.
Yes.
You are definitely separating through all this out. Like it or not, God is separating animals and people. And with that separation comes that the more separated you are, the greater the blessings.
Right.
The closer you get to be to God in his presence.
But the greater the responsibility too.
The more restrictions you have.
Yes.
And so it's just fascinating that you go, okay, even animals, it's not that God created good animals and bad animals.
Right.
And the ones that aren't being eaten are bad. No, he made them all.
They're all good.
They're all good. It's just God says, I'm going to set some aside for a different purpose.
Right.
And some from that group for a different purpose.
Right. And God has the right to do this. He's God.
And one of the things I'm going to say, and I will probably say it again when we get into some of these chapters, but unclean animals, it's not a general health warning.
Right.
That, don't eat those. Because truthfully, God's God, so he set it up. So in some of it you can go, it makes sense why he said not to eat.
But not all of them.
But not all of them. You cannot find a healthy, not healthy reason why all of these animals are on the list. One of the commentaries said, some of this is shrouded in mystery.
Because he's God.
Yes.
And we don't get to know it all.
Yes. So some of this you're just going to go, you know what? That's how God set it up.
And that's
really
okay.
Can't answer.
Yes.
Why is this animal clean, but this one's unclean?
Right.
I don't know. But with that, then, as we're setting up Leviticus, there's a couple things we need to keep in mind. You have things that are common and things that are holy. Or you have people that are common and people that are holy.
Right.
And if you don't understand the word holiness, you need to go back. I should have looked it up.
We have a podcast.
Our podcast on Kadosh. It's in the Old Testament Treasures. It was before the end of it was in 2023.
So it's like 150s, 160s?
160s.
160s.
If you don't understand the concept of holiness, go listen to that because we talk about holiness. The word Kadosh, Qadosh, actually appears 150 times in some form in the book of Leviticus.
This is a book about the holiness of God.
Yes. But holiness doesn't just mean holiness. It means consecrated, set apart, other than unique. So we have things that are common and uncommon. Holy.
Okay.
We have things that are common and set apart.
Okay.
And that's part of what we're going to learn as we get into this. You also then have things that are pure and impure.
Now, common doesn't mean sinful.
No, and impurity doesn't mean sinful.
Right.
None of this is necessarily sinful. It's just when you get...
Distinction?
Yeah, distinction would be a good word. When you get into dealing with going into God's presence, not everything gets to go in how you want it to go in.
Right.
So you can have something that is common and holy. Let me put it this way. Common and holy can both be pure.
Okay.
And holy can be holy and most holy.
Okay.
So you can have something that is common being pure. You can have something that is holy. It can become impure.
Yes.
So that's where we're kind of wrestling with all these different thoughts of common, holy, pure, and impure.
And those are opposites, but one's not good or bad or
right.
sinful.
It doesn't necessarily mean sinful.
It just means like in the presence.
Yes.
One can enter the tabernacle precinct, one can't.
Yes. Because it is permissible for an Israelite to become impure when necessary. Touching a dead body makes you impure. But you have to it's not like they left their dead bodies laying wherever they dropped dead.
That would be very unsanitary.
It would. So an Israelite would have to come in and touch the dead body to move it to a place where they were a location. It just meant that person who had just touched the dead body could not just walk into the courtyard at the tabernacle.
I'm always struck by the fact that intimacy with your spouse is impure. But it's not a sin.
No, because the thought is there at that moment after the intimacy occurs, you don't know if the sperm and the egg have united to create life.
Oh.
And so that's why it's, according to some of the research I've done, that's why it's impure, because you don't know if life has resulted or if it's still death. Those objects were wasted. They were not used. The ultimate goal
is life.
And if they don't create life, it could be, okay, nothing
so
comes of it.
That's
why you're impure.
Right. It's not that you sinned. It's just you may not have created life.
Yes.
So you could live, if you didn't, and maybe I'm jumping, but if you didn't enter the tabernacle,
you're fine.
You could live.
This is going into the tabernacle.
Right.
The problem is impurity is contagious.
Right.
So you have to be careful. So therefore I don't want to accidentally touch you and you're impure.
Right.
And you gave me the cooties and then I go into the tabernacle.
Because then I'm in trouble.
Yes.
Purity could not be spread.
Purity is not really spread.
Right. But impurity does.
Yes. Because here's the thing, and this is what I love. Ritual purity is kind of a two-way protection. A holy thing is protected from the profane. Okay, so the tabernacle, God's presence, the things dedicated to God, the Ark of the Covenant, those are holy and they're being protected from being contaminated.
Right. Because all of this is in God's presence. It needs to remain holy.
But also the profane is protected from the holiness. So you, an impure person, because you touched a dead body or whatever, you're protected from dropping dead in God's presence.
Right.
So purity is that two-way street.
These separations protect me from strolling into God's presence and dropping dead because I didn't realize I touched so-and-so who touched so-and-so who touched a dead body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it goes that far.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's just one so-and-so.
I don't know. Just trying to walk very carefully.
Right. How exactly all of this worked.
But purity is a two-way street.
Okay.
Holy thing is protected from the profane.
Okay.
And the profane is protected from holiness.
Right.
So one of the things as I've been wrestling with Leviticus, it's like Leviticus and Deuteronomy have several common chapters. Leviticus has blessings and cursings. Deuteronomy has blessings and cursings. Mm-hmm. They have some similar rules, especially chapters 18, 19, and 20. Of Leviticus, you'll see those at other places in Deuteronomy.
Okay.
So one of the things to keep in mind as you're studying either one of those books, Leviticus is theocratic. It's a system of a government where the priests rule in the name of God. and your institutions are sacred.
Right.
This is about worshiping God. Deuteronomy is more governmental, and your institutions are secular. Leviticus more has to deal with the Jews coming into the tabernacle.
Right.
Deuteronomy is Israel as a whole and other nations.
Okay. Right. Two different focuses.
Yes. Because Leviticus is teaching the people how to live together as a holy people. Karen Hannah Pryor in her book says, this is a book teaching for the priests. It's instructions on meeting requirements associated with the sanctuary. It's teaching the people how to live as a kingdom of priests.
Right.
And how to lead holy lives in service to God, both individually and communally. Because truthfully, we know this from Exodus, they were supposed to be a kingdom of priests, not with priests.
Right.
And even though they're not a kingdom of priests, they are still commanded to be a light to the nations.
Right.
And one of the ways you do that is as you worship God, your worship looks different.
Yes.
Than the other nations.
Yeah.
Because Karen Pryor says, when you think of what happened and what you saw at the golden calf incident, that was chaotic. There wasn't order. There wasn't thought out things. And she said Leviticus, its concept of purity is the exact opposite. The structure, the routine that you see happening in Leviticus is the exact opposite of what happened at the golden calf incident.
Because the golden calf was chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
There was no structure. Everybody did whatever they wanted. Mm-hmm. But in Leviticus, everybody has very specific.
Mm-hmm. You know exactly what's going to happen, whose part, and what they're going to play.
Right. So God is taking from chaos and creating order, like he does in Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's exactly what God is constantly doing. He's taking things from a state of chaos and putting it into a state of order. He gives us holiness and order, which we can achieve. And Karen Pryor says holiness must be valued and protected.
Holiness must be valued and protected.
Because the whole idea is when you have order, when you have holiness, when you have these levels and these things to do, it brings a peace and a structure and a routine that everyone knows what to do.
And it brings God's presence.
Yes. So,
do we protect God's order?
I don't know.
And God's holiness. Wow.
But I want to set us up for next week.
Okay.
Next week, we're going to actually get into the books.
That's okay. We're getting good foundation, so no worries.
One of the things you have to keep in mind, let me move my notes over here in front of my face real quick.
Glasses.
I don't need glasses. They're off to my side. The most frequent word in the book of Leviticus is the proper name for God.
Okay.
Yeah, we would say Yahweh.
YHWH. Yeah.
Yes. It's used 311 times. There's 50 times just the word God is used. And there's countless pronominal pronouns. That's what I mean. References. I, me, my. Or God, or saying he, him, all referring back to God. So that's real quick. 311 plus 50 plus countless other pronouns.
Essentially, it's all about God. Is what you're saying. He is the main character in the book.
Well, and then you have 35 times when it says Yahweh is speaking. Or you also have then Yahweh spoke. And you have 31 reminders as Yahweh commanded. So as we talked about last week, that repetition, look for those repeated words. God said it, God said it, God said it.
Right.
In fact, Leviticus consists almost exclusively of a divine monologue to Moses and through Moses to the people. Leviticus reinforces the conviction that before God's people are anything else, they're a listening community. Which
we are to listen.
Thought was fascinating. This needs to be the first message the church needs to hear from Leviticus.
We listen.
We listen. And we listen because he's God.
Because he's holy and we need to protect and want to partake in that holiness.
And he's other than.
And he gets to tell us what that means and how that looks. In details. He is into the details. He has a plan.
Yeah. So, And that's where I go, you know what? Some of this, it's not always going to make sense. Right. There are times parents say, do what I say.
Right.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Right. Yes.
Trust the process.
Or if you homeschool and you're teaching math or reading, it's amazing how having a 10th grader versus a first grader,
yes.
I look at what my first grader's learning and I go, oh, I see how this is going to help you in 10th grade if you get this concept. But you're not ready for it in first grade. And truthfully, when it comes to the book of Leviticus, we're all probably in preschool.
Right. And what's fascinating, one of the first thing Leviticus starts with is sacrifices.
Right.
And so Jacob Milgrom, in his book on Leviticus, sets the tabernacle up this way. That outer shrine, the whole thing, that's God's private dining room. He says the menorah provides light. The altar of incense provides the aroma. The bread on the table is your dining table.
Yep.
The Holy of Holies is God's resting place. The ark is God's footstool. And the 2 seraphim are God's steeds representing God's flying throne. God was personally accessible. This was his earthly home.
Yep.
And you reached God by sacrifices. That smoke rising was their prayers going up. So next week, we're going to get into the specifics about sacrificing.
Oh, next week. You don't want to do it.
But I want to set everyone up right now.
Oh, okay.
Like chapter 1 next week.
Gotcha.
But as I'm just going to throw some thoughts out, I'm not going to answer them. My whole point is to allow you to start wrestling with the purpose of sacrificing. So we are all kind of thinking about this for the next couple of weeks. It's common to say that sacrificing saved them in the Old Testament, and it was necessary for the forgiveness of sins. And we know that sacrificing can only be done at the temple. So here's my question. What did the person who didn't live around the temple, around the tabernacle, let me stick with tabernacle. What did the person who didn't live near Jerusalem, I'm going to stick with temple too, live near Jerusalem do? How often were they running to Jerusalem to sacrifice for their sins? Were they going daily if they didn't live within walking distance? Would they go weekly? Would they go monthly? If sacrificing is about salvation, why did they do it more than once? Why did they keep doing it over and over again? And what do you do for those who live in exile outside of Israel? Did those people not get forgiveness then? Which sacrifices address entering God's heavenly realm? We all know there's the earthly temple and there's the heavenly temple. And which sacrifice addresses cleansing my heart of stone? Which sacrifice lasts so it's not necessary again? And Erica is cringing.
I'm not cringing. I'm
over
just
there.
smirking.
Because what we're trying to do is go, we've really got to dig into this book. So I am asking very
pointed
questions that I'm not answering. I need you, as you're sitting here listening, I need you to be able to answer that. I'm not going to answer it for you. I'm just going, here's what you need. As you're studying Leviticus, here's what you need to be able to answer to help you understand sacrificing and the point in Leviticus.
We talked about stretching our mental muscles
Yes.
last week, and
Yes.
these questions are a part of a way of doing that. We want you to stretch and think and go, oh, I never thought of it like that. Oh, I hadn't asked myself that question.
Yes.
What about the Jewish people that lived away from the tabernacle or the temple?
How did they do it? What did they do?
How are they
Because
forgiven?
the point is, we say so many things, but we don't always put it into practical terms.
Right.
So that's all I'm trying to do.
Right.
But because we all know at the beginning, there's a problem. God wants man to draw near to him, but he can't. Right. Sin separates us. Something else has to draw near to God.
Right.
Drawing close to God's manifest presence on earth is different than what we have today. We're not used to this thought necessarily.
Yes.
Because even Moses couldn't enter the tabernacle right away.
Yep.
If you go to the end of Exodus, God's glory descends and nobody really moves.
Or if you go to when the temple was built,
Right?
In Chronicles.
Or Chronicles.
Or King, it's both. Yeah. The priest can't enter the temple.
Right. So the whole point is, and then what I love is Leviticus starts with God going, hey, Moses, come here.
Right. I'd be like, no, you come here.
Right. Because you don't walk into God's presence haphazardly or casually.
Right.
Somehow there's something we all know, blood must be shed.
Or I feel like as Christians today, we have taken it for granted.
Yeah.
You know, Hebrews says, come boldly before the throne of grace. Jesus is our sacrifice.
Yep.
We have forgotten the weight
of
entering the presence of a holy God, the cost of entering the presence of a holy God, the seriousness of it.
Because Karen Hannon Pryor says, all these actions, the whole sacrifice system involves time, effort, and cost to the individual.
You have to want it.
Yes.
You have to want to enter God's presence.
Yes. This gives the worshiper time to consider his actions, to face any sins, take responsibility, take appropriate actions beforehand, because words alone are not enough to purify one's heart. There needs to be corresponding deeds.
Repentance.
Yes.
Get up and walk the other way.
Yes. And so what I want to do as we look at sacrifices, we need to really you cannot understand and say, oh, Jesus' death took care of all this if you don't really understand these sacrifices.
Right. What does it mean that Jesus' death
took
care of this?
Right. And so, because let's be honest, if there was a temple built right now and we all watch God's presence his holiness drop on it, who's going to sign up to go in first? How are you going to know you can just boldly walk into the throne? What are you really going to do to go, I want to cross that boundary line?
I would study the book of Leviticus.
I'd let somebody else go first.
Yes.
That
goes without saying.
Because let me say it this way, entering God's presence is a costly affair. And the book of Leviticus shows us that the sacrifice is killed and the blood is spilled on the altar. The blood is not spilled, like
it's poured.
Yeah,
sprinkled.
The blood is poured on the altar. And the whole point is the worshiper who's bringing that sacrifice realizes he should have been slaughtered instead. And it's his blood that should be on the altar. And it gives you a weightier, heavier,
right.
Oh, what am I doing? What is this costing me?
Right.
And so that's where I go, with all that, we need to understand this better. Because in a way, you have those aromatic smoke going heavenward, and God would breathe in that pleasing aroma.
Right.
We have, let me skip in my notes. You have that there's 5 different sacrifices we're going to talk about. I'm looking.
Part of the sacrifices that I think we miss is that it's a way to draw near to God. That's the purpose of the sacrifice. And we think sacrifices is all about sin and earning forgiveness and salvation. But when you study it, I mean, even the word korban.
Right.
Is
which we'll get into next week.
Oh, to draw near.
Right.
And so if we could even start getting that mental image of this is about me drawing near to God. So this is about dwelling in God's presence.
Because God is worshipped. I found my spot in my notes where I was looking. God is worshipped through sacrifices.
Right.
And God ordained this method of worship. So we need to take the time to understand it.
Yes.
And to understand what it means. Like Erica said, and we'll get into it next week. What is a korban? It's the Hebrew word that means draw near. What does that mean to draw near to God's presence? How do I do that?
Because if I can, I want to, but I need to know how, because he's holy and I'm not, and it will kill me.
Because Daniel Lancaster says human beings seemed hardwired to recognize their need for atonement in the face of the divine. There is just something look at all the other religions.
Yes.
There's something about I need to do something.
Yeah.
to worship you, to come into your presence. Sacrifice in one form or another was universal in the world's ancient religions. The Bible, the Torah, puts form, structure, and definition around that God-given impulse.
Which to me makes sense. God would put it inside of us that this is something we need to do. And then in the right time, he comes along and says, here's how you do it. That to me makes total sense.
So that's what we're going to look at next week on the podcast.
We're going to start in Leviticus chapter 1.
Yes, we're getting to Leviticus chapter 1.
That's all right. We've got some good
sacrifices.
shelves now.
Yes.
And we're going to dive into a little bit more about sacrifices and how to do them.
Now we're going to start getting into the actual books and going through chapter by chapter, grouping by grouping. But the first thing that we run into when you walk into the book of Leviticus is the sacrifices.
Because that is a huge...
It's how you draw into God's presence.
Right.
How you worship him. How does that affect us?
Right.
How did that affect them back then?
And we need to understand what this meant for the original audience. We need to understand what this meant for them. And then once we get that lesson, then we can bring it forward.
Yep.
And say, okay, now knowing this is what it meant, what does it mean? And that's what we're trying to do, using those mental muscles.
Yes, that we're stretching. So,
alrighty.
Don't forget, we do have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Pinterest. Different ways you can interact with us, different ways you can see our graphics that go along. Right. We have the newsletter. We have our website. You can sign up at www.thecontextandcolorofthebiblebook.com. You can interact. If you sign up for the newsletter, you get to email us directly back.
Woohoo! We'd love to hear from you.
Yes. So, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.